Good evening, friends. This is Arrowjero from the Arrowjero channel on YouTube that you are currently watching. Wow, isn't that something? What a small world we live in. It's been a long day in New York City. It is the middle of the night and I'm in my pajamas. Kinda cute, right? I'm also drinking beer tonight. And what do we have? We've got Sapporo beer. Which I love. It's my favorite. I mean, I've had them all. Well, I've had all the mainstream beers of Japan. Asahi Kirin, I don't like it. I think it's pretty terrible. Asahi's good. Sapporo's delicious. Orion is also pretty good. Sapporo's just my favorite. In January, I went to Sapporo. I did the tour. I thought it was fantastic. It's different than a lot of other places that I've been to or lived in Japan. My feeling on why it was different, why it was special, was there's not as much gaijin stigma as is attached to a lot of other places in Japan, especially in Kanto or near Tokyo. And I think I felt this way because people just speak Japanese to you when you speak Japanese. I feel in Tokyo, you speak Japanese, you're going to get a response in English. Maybe that's because people know a little English, and so maybe that's something more to be said about people in Tokyo, and we can admire them for that. But I enjoyed being in Sapporo. They just treat you like a person. Language, it didn't feel to me, and this probably isn't an accurate, anthropological description, but it didn't feel to me that people were labeled by language. Just because I address in Japanese, I am answered in Japanese. If somebody's talking to me, they speak in Japanese, and it just made me feel like a person that speaks the same language as everybody else. And it was cool. That's what I want when I go to Japan, and I really liked that. It was my first time in Sapporo. I had a great time. It was freezing cold. It was January, and it was very snowy, and everybody kept saying, why did you come this month and not next month for the Yuki Matsuri, the snow festival? And it was because I couldn't get time off work, which is sad, but that is life. I come to you tonight because a couple nights ago, I broke the rule that I had set for myself, and I started talking about religion. And I mentioned that I was a Mormon. I was a Mormon missionary, and I thought I'll just put it out there. I've got a lot to say about religion in Japan. I'll start with my Japanese roots. I started studying Japanese when I was a young teenager, before I was in high school. There was a girl, not a Japanese girl, a Hakujin, a white girl, who I had a crush on, and she was interested in Japanese because she was a little bit anime. She was an anime girl. I remember one summer before high school started, we were laying in some grass, and she was drawing Japanese characters on my arm, and I thought that was like the coolest thing, and I had a lot of hormones rushing through my body because I was a young teenager, and so when it came time to sign up for classes, I signed up for Japanese, and I studied all the way through high school, and I was a Mormon. I was a good Mormon. I went to seminary every morning, and I read my Bible and my Book of Mormon. And so I graduated from high school, and you go on a Mormon mission. And you don't get to choose where you go. Of course I wanted to go to Japan. You don't get to choose, but they do ask you if you know any languages. I'd studied Japanese for 4 years. It wasn't any good. But I'd studied. I mentioned in my paperwork that I studied. So I got lucky, and they did send me to Tokyo. The Mormon church sent me to Tokyo, and I spent 2 years there refining the language, learning to read and write. I can't really write anymore. That's so sad. I started working on it again. I still read okay, but my handwriting is terrible. I've found that if your handwriting is bad in English, it's going to be just as bad or worse in Japanese. If your handwriting is good in English, then there's a pretty good chance you'll write okay in Japanese. So, just an observation, but it really has nothing to do with what I'm talking about tonight. Going to be a missionary in Japan, you don't really get any formal training when you get there. You're paired up with another guy just as young as you are. I was 19 when I got there. Another guy who's 19 or 20 has been there for a few more months than you, so knows a little bit of the language, but I didn't know anything. I'd studied Japanese for 4 years in high school. I could barely string a sentence together. And that's being generous, I couldn't really do that. That took a few months. It was about 6 months in when I felt comfortable just listening to people and responding. Prior to that, if I thought about it, I could put a sentence together, but I couldn't necessarily understand anything that anybody was saying to me. So the conversation took 6 months. And that's, being out there on your own with really nobody to rely on, except for another guy who is, 19. And sometimes you're with a companion who is Japanese and can't really speak English, and so all you can do is communicate in Japanese. And so that's an experience. It's a cool experience. People who, I keep picking up my beer and not drinking it. That's the worst. But I kind of feel rude. I'm like here talking to nobody. But hey, I shouldn't say nobody. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you. If anybody's out there actually watching this, cheers. I told Audio Anime that I was going to dedicate this video to them, and I do. Thank you. My first follower was Audio Anime, so thank you and cheers. I hope you got a drink in your hand. Delicious. Ooh. Japanese people that know or recognize Mormon missionaries in Japan know them as people, and we would get this all the time, riding bikes with white shirts and ties and white helmets. That's what made us famous and recognizable. What I found, and a lot of what your day-to-day is usually, you'll spend a lot of daytime knocking on doors, and you'll say a spiel. We're missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We're here talking about how your family can be forever and how you can find happiness on earth and bullshit like that. We would say that. Oh gosh, it sounds terrible in English. It was just as bad as in Japanese, but it didn't feel that way because it wasn't my native language. So how annoying. Good grief. So I apologize, Japan, for being intrusive, but we were cold calling people and asking them how they felt about the meaning of life. And when you're knocking doors in the middle of the day, who do you think is going to answer your door? It's Oba-chan. It's middle-aged to older women that are at home, their husbands are at work, and they're so kind. And they would often talk to us. Sometimes they would invite us in and offer us tea. But Mormons can't drink tea, so it was just an exercise in futility. I have no idea what I was doing, but I had a great time. I learned Japanese quite well. You learn a lot of skills. You learn how to cook and clean and interact with somebody, live with somebody. I had two 20-year-old guys living together for that long. Like, that's crazy. I didn't punch anybody the whole time, so that's a skill to learn. Weird. But a cool observation that I had was everybody was Bukkyo. Like, nobody's, and I talk in generalizations, but let's all start off by saying that I may speak in generalizations, but there's exceptions to every rule. There are hundreds and thousands of exceptions, but for the most part, nobody's really Buddhist. Everybody says Bukkyo desu. I am Buddhist. Bukkyo is Buddhism, and everybody says that. So they say Kekko desu, which means no thank you. And which is politer than, you know, some things that they could say. Maybe would be more appropriate. And even when people were really polite and they would invite us in, they would say, "No, thank you, I'm Buddhist." And what I found was funny is nobody really puts a lot of thought into the Buddhism that they claim to be. They probably will have a shrine. They may do some prayers. They may ring a bell and put their hands together and go like this and, you know, mutter something to their ancestors. And so much of the religion is tied to the culture. I think a lot of people could have been perfectly happy converting to Mormonism. Not that they should. I don't recommend that to anyone. If you've watched any of my other videos, I have left Mormonism, but it is a great religion. People take care of each other. It's very social. There's nothing wrong with the social aspect of Mormonism. That's very positive, and people could be happy converting. But they wouldn't because of the social stigma that would be attached. If you're Japanese, you're just Bukkyo. That is what you are. People will expect for you to have that shrine in your house. They will expect for you to ring that bell and to say that prayer before the meal. And if when they walk in your house you've got a picture of Jesus Christ on your wall instead, then now there's an entirely different stigma attached, and you're weird because you're not part of the pack. And if you know anything about Japanese culture, you want to be part of the pack. So that was something that was really interesting to me. Now, I watched a really cool video that was posted by my YouTube hero. Now, I love a lot of J-vloggers on YouTube. I subscribe to a lot of J-vloggers, but Victor's Give Me a Flag Man channel is it's one of my favorites. He's fantastic, and I want to grow up to be just like him. And he posted a really cool video recently with Ronan Dave, and Ronan Dave talked about anime people versus culture people. You know, a ton of people out there love Japan, and there is a significant number of anime people out there, and they get into Japanese language and Japanese culture because of anime. And there's nothing wrong with that, because Japan is an awesome place, and it's a beautiful culture and an incredible language. Studying the language that's one of my passions and my hobbies. So, you know, I certainly don't think that there's anything wrong with that. And, you know, so if you are one of those people, more power to you. You found something beautiful that led you to something more beautiful. Because my interest in Japan didn't spring from that. In fact, it took years before I ever watched an anime. Years after I left Japan. So, you know, I'd made it through studying Japanese in high school. And then I got to my Mormon mission, and I spent 2 years there. And it took even a few years after coming back to the United States. And I would go back to Japan periodically, but I was in a stint where I hadn't been to Japan in a while, and I really missed it. And somebody told me that there was an anime convention called KawaiiCon coming to Hawaii, which is where I lived at the time. And I thought, I'm going. There's going to be a ton of people who love Japan, Japanese stuff. I don't know anything about anime, but it was going to be my way to connect to what I missed so dearly. So I got tickets, I went, I had a great time, and I connected to anime via the culture, because anime was a part of Japanese culture. And I feel like that's kind of a more organic way to embrace Japanese culture, rather than going from anime to culture, going to anime via culture, because it is part of it. I don't know if that makes sense. After a couple beers, it really does to me. Now, I mean, since I'm talking about that video, and I'm talking about Mormonism. I'm just going to keep talking about Victor because he is a very smart guy. And he said something else in the same video. I will include the link in the description. But quite frankly, there's nobody that will ever subscribe to me that doesn't already subscribe to him, but I'll just make sure you watch it twice. Victor said in this video, he said that as people, we usually hate things that are close to us but different. We're perfectly accepting of things that are completely opposite to us. But if you're like us, but you're a little different, like for example, Victor used the example of Christians to Jews. You know, we often, you know, let's say you're a white Christian living in the United States, and you know, you see you know, a Jewish person who's also got white skin. They believe in the Old Testament, but then they don't believe in Jesus, who is the Lord and Savior of Christianity. So you're like us, and you're close. It's like you're similar enough that you should know better. I mean, that's the kind of imagery that comes to me, and is messed up, of course, and not right. But I agree with him, and I had experiences due to my Mormon mission that really rang true. So I thought I'd share a little bit of that, about that with you. Part of me becoming disenchanted with the Mormon Church was because I went on my mission to Japan. When I got there and I spent time there, we kind of go with the premise of saying to other people, there's only one true way to happiness. Let me show you. Which, you know, that sounds just so condescending, obviously. But being out there, being with Japanese people, spending 2 years just walking around, talking to people, getting to know people, making friends, you know, people are just as happy there, doing what they do. And when I was in the United States, growing up as a teenager, my church made quite sure that I stayed in my own little bubble. My friends were all Mormons. The activities that I went to were Mormon related, and I didn't really have to leave. I could get all the fulfillment socially that I needed via the Mormon church. So I step out of the bubble and I see, you know what, people are getting just as much social and emotional fulfillment doing their own thing. And what I have to offer is not as special as, you know, I try to make it sound to people. So refreshing. So, and it took years to really come to terms with the fact that I was disenchanted with the church and to really make my exit. Years and years after the mission ended. But those seeds of doubt were planted through that. Now, when I left, back to Victor's statement about hating something that's a little bit different. Once I got out of the church, I was really rejected. People that leave the church are so rejected. You are a wolf in sheep's clothing. You know, you are what they would call a son of perdition. You knew the truth and you left it. You rejected it. Jesus touched your heart, you pushed him away, and there is not a circle of hell deep enough for what you deserve. And I didn't expect that. I had dedicated my life to the church. I had loved it, and I still do. I still attend the meetings quite often, but nobody wants to have anything to do with me. I'm not a believer like they are anymore, and I found that interesting. There are most Mormons have no problem with people that aren't believers. They want to be their friends. They will share their faith. They think you're cool if you've got friends that are not of your faith. But and these are people who've got nothing to do, nothing in common with them, as far as, you know, what they believe. Now, my experiences, a lot of my beliefs are still in line with the people that are the Mormons. I've got a ton of experiences that are similar to theirs. I can relate to them on a lot of different levels. You know, I'm very